Bismillah, alhamdulillah, wassalatu wassalam ala Rasulullah. Assalamu alaikum, everyone. This is Edward Ahmed Mitchell, welcoming you to this segment on Muslim Network TV. Thank you so much for joining us. It's a big week. It's a big day. As many of you know, a ceasefire has been announced that would, in theory, end the ongoing genocide in Gaza, free captives on both sides, and, God willing, lead to, hopefully, a long term peace. But nothing is settled yet. People are still being killed, and it's not clear what is going to happen next. To discuss how we got to this moment, what took so long, and what might be happening next, we're happy to bring on our special guest, Professor Michael Lynk. Professor Lynk is a Canadian legal academic. He's currently an associate professor at the University of Western Ontario, and you may know him because from 2016 to 2022, he was the Special Rapporteur on the situation of human rights in the occupied Palestinian territories. And we're very happy to have him here with us today. Professor Lynk, thank you for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me.
Absolutely, absolutely. So, first, Professor, what was your reaction to hearing the news of the ceasefire deal yesterday? Obviously, we're going to talk about what has happened since then, but just what was your initial reaction to it?
Well, two. First of all, tentative optimism. Something that the world has been demanding for almost since the beginning of this war in October 2023. That a ceasefire finally was achieved. Hallelujah. But the second reaction that came immediately after that is, what's taken this so long? The world has been calling for a ceasefire through UN resolutions since November 2023. We had a comprehensive UN Security Council resolution in June 2024, which laid out the parameters that are being adopted by the ceasefire announcement yesterday and today. Why, if we've had a UN Security Council resolution laying out exactly what the ceasefire agreement would be, has it taken 7 more months for us to arrive at this point? This can only be, depending on your point of view, either an epic failure in American diplomacy to push a resolution that it itself had introduced at the Security Council and for which it said it had Israel's agreement, or perhaps more cynically, this was a triumph in American diplomacy in allowing Israel to continue the war to try to see if it could achieve more of its war aims over the subsequent 7 months. I'll allow people listening to this interview to decide what it is, but either way, it's a failure that has resulted in the increased humanitarian suffering in the Gaza Strip.
Yeah. Absolutely. Thousands of people have been killed over the past 7 months, including more of the Israeli captives that Netanyahu supposedly cares about. What role do you think the introduction of President-elect Trump's victory played in this? I mean, you've seen some reports that his envoy, Mr. Witkoff, might have put some pressure on Netanyahu to make a deal. Certainly, Trump has been openly threatening to unleash hell if the hostages are not home. Any insight on what role you think his contributions played in this, for better or for worse?
Sure. I think I'd be among the last people to try to give Donald Trump credit for anything positive that's happened in the Middle East. But I will say I think it was he and his envoy who, as you said, pushed Netanyahu to finally agree to the ceasefire that he obviously doesn't want, and was able to accomplish in a couple of days what the Biden administration wasn't able to do over the course of the 15 months of the total war, and particularly the last 7 months since we had the UN Security Council resolution in place. So I would give some credit to President-elect Trump for bringing this to a conclusion. But let's see actually what kinds of arrangements were made in order to get this ceasefire. There's talk, and certainly in the Israeli press, that once all of the remaining hostages are released, that the Trump administration might be open to giving a green light to resume the war in order to further try to degrade Hamas's military capabilities in the Gaza Strip. As well, there's speculation in the Israeli press that one of the, if you like, backdoor understandings between the Trump administration and Netanyahu is that if Netanyahu can bring some of his recalcitrant right-wing cabinet ministers online to support the ceasefire agreement and not bring down the Netanyahu coalition, that there will be, if you like, a green light coming from the United States to widen the ability of Israel to expand the settlements, and the number of settlers in the West Bank. Right now, we have an increase each year of around 20 to 25,000 settlers in East Jerusalem and the West Bank, totaling right now about 750,000 settlers. The Minister of Settlements, Benzalim Shmolich, has talked about wanting to increase the settlement number by 500,000 in the next 2 years. I think that's fantasy, but even if he was able to increase that because of a green light given by the United States to 40,000 or 50,000 a year, that would mean no Palestinian state and permanent Israeli rule over the West Bank.
Yeah. And would make it hard to see how President Trump can achieve that goal that he's talked about of some sort of grand normalization deal involving Israel, Saudi Arabia, assuming that Saudi is not willing to go along with such a deal if there's no Palestinian state. What do you make of the past 24 hours? You've seen a surge in Israeli bombing of Gaza, even though it's supposed to be coming to an end. It seems like they're trying to kill as many people as they can before the deal comes into effect. That's what a cynical person would say, or an observant person would say, I should say. And then at the same time, Netanyahu is now saying he doesn't, that the deal's not done yet, and that Hamas is pulling out. What do you make of these kind of last minute machinations we're seeing?
I think that the issue is not quibbling over what was agreed to or not yet agreed to at the negotiating table. I think Benjamin Netanyahu's cold feet for finally putting the ceasefire agreement to his security cabinet has everything to do with the threats by two of his far right-wing cabinet ministers, Itamar Ben-Gvir, the Minister of National Security, and Bezalel Shmolich, as Minister of Finance and Minister of Settlements, who are threatening to pull out of the coalition if the ceasefire agreement is reached. Shmolich has said that he doesn't want to see a ceasefire agreement until Hamas is completely wiped out, which every single leading defense minister and IDF military commanders have said is an impossible goal to wind up achieving. Indeed, even U.S. Secretary of State Anthony Blinken said the other day that Hamas has replaced most of the fighters that it's wound up being killed over the last 15 months. They still are going to be a formidable political and military force in Gaza once this ceasefire is achieved. So I think what really is going on is Netanyahu needing the time to see if he can offer more gifts to the far right, including this increased green light for settlements, in order to bring them on board or to at least not to bring down his government. In many ways, if these two far right-wing cabinet ministers did bring down the government, it would be bringing down the temple upon themselves, because I cannot imagine any other coalition possibility in Israel that ever would include such far right-wing ministers as Ben-Gvir and Shmolich. They would never again be in power. So I'm sure they're making noises about wanting to bring down the coalition, but really waiting for some quid pro quo in order to stay on board.
Interesting, interesting. So the next few days then will be very telling, and also beyond that to see what, if anything, they're promised, what that might turn out to be. What do you think, Professor Lynk, is just the future for Palestine, for Israel, for that matter? I mean, Gaza has been destroyed. Let's assume the 42 days go by successfully, and the hostages come out, and there's a flood of aid. But then there's going to be a big debate, it seems, for phase 2 and phase 3 about what happens to Gaza next. If Netanyahu doesn't want the Palestinian Authority there, who's going to run Gaza? And if Hamas is still there, where do you see things coming a month from now or 6 weeks from now? What are the possibilities?
Well, let's look at both the weeks and the months ahead of us, because I think there are 4 or 5 key issues that we have to keep in mind and not lose sight of. First of all, is the reconstruction of Gaza. We've had over 2 million people displaced from their homes, sometimes as many as 10 times. There's no homes now really for many of them to return to in central Gaza or northern Gaza. There's no economy to speak of in Gaza to try to revive. Gaza, from all of the drone pictures or aerial satellite pictures that we've seen, resembles Dresden or Tokyo after the end of the Second World War. The World Bank has estimated that it's going to cost somewhere between $45 billion and $60 billion to reconstruct Gaza in a period of time that would take the next 15 to 20 years. Who's going to pay for that? And who's going to be willing to sink that kind of money into Gaza if there's always the threat of more war coming from a militarily superior power like Israel. A second point that we have to keep in mind is the issue of who's going to be governing Gaza. The international consensus, including by the outgoing U.S. administration, is that it should be some variation of a reformed Palestinian Authority. But the Palestinian Authority itself, while eager to do this, also recognizes that Hamas still has a significant presence on the ground. And then we have to deal with the fact that Israel does not want to see Hamas or the Palestinian Authority have any role in the future of Gaza, because they're opposed adamantly to any path that would lead to a genuine Palestinian state. I think what Benjamin Netanyahu has said is that he's looking for local Palestinian leaders, his quote, who have some experience in governance. I think what he really means are some of the clan families in Gaza, particularly those who've been part of the criminal gangs and the looting of humanitarian aid that has been going into Gaza over the duration of this war. And with the Trump administration coming in, with Donald Trump surrounded by policy hawks on Gaza, the question is wide open as to who's going to be governing it. Will it be a UN trusteeship? Will it be some Arab countries bringing in both governance, short-term governance capability, and military troops? Many of them are going to be reluctant to want to do that as long as Hamas stays armed and is a presence in Gaza. So that remains an open question. Third issue is the issue of accountability. Many reputable human rights organizations, including Amnesty International, Human Rights Watch, the UN High Commissioner for Human Rights, the UN Special Rapporteur, have all said that war crimes and crimes against humanity have been committed by both sides, by the leaders of both sides. And indeed, they have said also that it's actually been genocide. We have arrest warrants out for one Hamas leader who may or may not still be alive, as well as for Benjamin Netanyahu and Yoav Gallant, his former defense minister. This has been an important step forward for international criminal justice. Yet we also have legislation that's now making its way through the American Congress, which would impose significant sanctions on the work of the International Criminal Court in The Hague, should go ahead and maintain these arrest warrants. This is a serious affront to international law, to international justice. And if this legislation comes into being, I think we're going to see significant divisions in the world over the future viability of international law. And the final question I'd raise is there a genuine path to Palestinian self-determination? Not with Donald Trump in power for the next 4 years, not with Benjamin Netanyahu in power. So even though Secretary of State Anthony Blinken has said that what is a choice for Israel with respect to its relationship with the Palestinians, and went on to say Israelis can no longer continue to regard Palestinians as a non-people who have no national rights. If there's no path to Palestinian self-determination, if there's no path to a genuine hope for the 5.5 million Palestinians under occupation, then we're only going to see a reset of what we just experienced in Gaza. We're seeing this already in the West Bank. We had the highest number of Palestinians killed in 2023 since the Second Palestinian Intifada 20 years earlier. And the figures for 2024 have already surpassed 2023. I think we're going to continue to see a high scale of violence in the West Bank. We may see it resume in Gaza. So as much as I am an optimist in many ways, I don't see anything but a bleak short-term and medium-term future for Gaza and the Palestinians.
Yeah, I think time will tell very soon, God willing, whether or not we're keeping down the rabbit hole of darkness or whether there might be some unexpected shift towards something positive. But as you just laid out, lots of variables, and the next 48 hours are going to tell us a lot as well, God willing. Professor, I want to thank you so much for your time and your expertise today and for your work on this issue. It's greatly appreciated and recognized, and we hope to come back with you again in the future to discuss the new developments, God willing.
I'd welcome that, and thank you very much for having me.
And thank you all for watching this segment. Again, this conversation is going to continue with many other guests speaking about this very time-sensitive issue, and we look forward to seeing you again soon, God willing. Thank you so much. Assalamu alaikum.